One more big story this week, and that is that Matt Tissier stood down as Southampton ambassador after a controversial social media post. For the benefit of those listening, what's that on your head, Glenn?
It's a tinfoil hat.
I knew this was going to be a bad idea. So on Tuesday, he shared a conspiracy theory regarding the killings of some civilians in Ukraine. He later deleted the post, just to be clear. He went on to clarify his position as well by saying the point was about media manipulation and making it very clear that he doesn't advocate war in any way, shape or form. He also said in his little statement he did online that it doesn't affect his relationship and his love for the club. He's always going to remain a fan and a supporter of everything Southampton. And he said, I will see you all at St Mary's. Dan, you wrote about that this week. We weren't sure whether he jumped or whether he was pushed. But you seem to think the club might have spoken to him in the past about this.
The club have spoken to Matt. The first time they properly spoke to him was with the, if you remember the Anne Frank meme, he tweeted, I think that was 2020, I think, kind of a few months into the pandemic at that point. That was the first time. Obviously, I think as we've kind of discussed off air a few times and in various other chats, that it is an incredibly nuanced situation. It's not an easy situation. And I think I'd like to think maybe we're all level-headed people. For me, the line was crossed probably with the Anne Frank meme, to be honest. I think that should have been the point where you just bite the bullet and enough is enough. But it carried on and it got to a point where it just culminated in what we saw last week. And, you know, taking the whole football side out of it, it is an impact. You just can't have, if you're Southampton Football Club, and Matt has stepped away, and I think he released a video on another platform saying that one of the reasons was because the club were getting, you know, they were facing quite a lot of criticism for having him as an ambassador because of his views. Equally, if you're the club, I'm looking at that and thinking, well, we've done all this work around the pandemic and in the community. I think that the work the Saints Foundation did during that initial lockdown and beyond was, you know, it was superb, wasn't it? And then around the vaccine, and then you've got an ambassador, you know, saying what he's saying on Twitter. And I appreciate not all Southampton fans are on Twitter. So you could go down the high street and say, oh, what do you make of Matt's comment? They wouldn't even know what you were talking about. You've then got all the kind of work the club did around BLM, and then you've got Matt giving his opinion on Twitter about that. You've then got the club shouting from the rooftops about how great they're doing from a sustainability point of view and kind of climate change. And then you've got an ambassador telling you that it's all nonsense and climate change isn't real, it's made up. And then you get to the point where you've got an ambassador implying that the media are making up images of dead men, women and children. At what point is enough? I think, as I said, enough was enough for me with Anne Frank, but it's ultimately Matt's made the right decision. I think the club were going to be put in an incredibly difficult situation had he not made that decision. And it's best for all parties that Matt did step away rather than the club have to kind of push him over the edge. So yeah, it's just an incredibly difficult one to address, really, because I mean, it is just so nuanced. But that for me was it. It's been 2.5 years, really, isn't it, of what we've all seen on Twitter and social media, and yeah, at some point you have to draw the line, and that he crossed the line in a big way. I think I saw on Twitter from a lot of fans as well. I saw that the one about Ukraine, I did really see the mood shift in a big way after that.
Yeah, and Glen, supporters will say free speech, you're entitled to your own opinion, but on this occasion, it's much more than that now, isn't it?
Well, you are entitled to freedom of speech. I get that, and Matt's big on that, but that doesn't give you freedom from consequences, you know, to your words. If you want to say don't believe everything that's in the media, that's fine, but don't use, you know, a heavily corroborated genocide tweet to illustrate that point of view, because it just amazes me that someone who's basically been working in the media for 20 years seems to be really lacking in media savvy. You know, before you press the button, you know how this is going to be received, and it will, you know, he's saying that he just wanted to say, don't believe the media. But if you use that as an example, then you know what's going to happen. And it's just staggering, really. I mean, it's obviously something in his personality to kind of, you know, have this sort of stubbornness about him. If you think back to the way he played, there would have been managers along the way. I mean, off the top of my head, I'm thinking Terry Venables, Ian Bramfoot, who would have wanted him to play slightly different. But Matt always did what he wanted to do. He always, probably to his detriment in terms of winning England caps and all that sort of stuff. So he's always had this sort of element of his personality. I mean, I will say it doesn't, you know, I'm almost exactly the same age as Matt, and I watched his entire career, and for what he did on the pitch, he will always be a legend in my eyes. And I've met him 2 or 3 times, and he's always been a really decent guy. You know, and I've always come away from those meetings, 3 or 4 of them, thinking, you know, what a decent bloke, you know, never meet your heroes and all that. But, you know, he's always been sort of spot on. But I agree with Dan that lines have been crossed, and when you have the responsibility of being the club ambassador, you can't say these sort of things and make these sort of comparisons without there being some sort of consequence. And it's just a shame. And I don't want a guy who's sort of been a legendary figure for me throughout my sort of football journey. I don't want him descending to sort of David Icke levels of ridicule, but that and hopefully, you know, hopefully it kind of stops. But we'll have to wait and see on that one.
It put the club in a very strange position, Steve, but we could see this coming, couldn't we?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been building up pretty much since he left Sky, hasn't it? I think that I don't know whether part of it is that he simply had so much time on his hands. You end up down this sort of rabbit warren on social media, watching these YouTube videos where lunatics are spouting absolute nonsense, and yet you kind of, I don't know, I don't really know how the brain works in that sense, in that he's obviously sort of gone down these routes and has suddenly thought, oh, actually, yeah, maybe they've got a point. It's like, really? It's and Matt's always come across as being a fairly intelligent guy, and it's I guess frustrating, a little bit kind of upsetting, I suppose, as someone who I mean, similar to Glen, I basically watched pretty much all of his career, apart from the sort of very early years. And yeah, he was one of my heroes growing up, and from a footballing perspective still is. But yeah, it's so disappointing that and I would imagine that he's had a lot of close friends sort of have a quiet word and say, look, Matt, are you sure you want to be going down this route? I don't know if Franny's,
you do wonder, don't you, what Franny's made of it all.
Had words, or like even someone like Jeff Stelling or something like that. People that he's worked with and is good friends with, have they sort of taken him to one side and said, look, come on, Matt, let's have a chat about this, and let's see if we can sort this out. But as Glenn said, his entire career has kind of been one of contrarianism. He's always wanted to sort of go against the grain, be that different player, and that different person. I mean, obviously, he turned down 2 big moves to Spurs and Chelsea back in the day, when these days any player would make that jump instantly. They wouldn't think twice about it. Nobody's going to stick around at Southampton if you're good enough to get in the first teams at Spurs and Chelsea. And it's that contrarianism that now is kind of counting against him, because he's desperate to still be that sort of opposing voice against against kind of the mainstream view. But I mean, this idea that mainstream media is lying to you, it's like, no, the reason why things are mainstream is because that's the commonly accepted truth, and it's just infuriating. You kind of bang your head against a wall when you see some of the arguments and stuff on social media, and it's just like, right, close that app for 10 minutes so I can just ignore that and get back to normal.
It's horrible when you see his name trending on Twitter, isn't it? You just think, oh
God, what's he said now?
What now?
I don't think we're going to be rushing to follow him on the new platform, whatever that might be.
I think that the real question is when are Glen and Steve going to pitch themselves to fill that vacancy for the ambassador? I mean, someone's got to do the
job. I've never upset anyone on Twitter apart from Brian Gunn. Apart from Brian Gunn, other than that, I'm fine. Martin Semmons, if you're watching, listening, here I am.
I know Matt won't care, but there used to be a beer named after him in my local pub, and I went in there at lunchtime just for lunch, and they've renamed the beer this week. So even they decided to move away.